What's up, peeps? Archie here. I was worried we wouldn't be able to do this. I'm very, very happy that we get to get caught up finally on our education. I hope you're all well fed. Hope you're doing well. I know the school's lunch isn't necessarily up to par all the time, but you know, you gotta make do with what you got. And unfortunately, what we got is a giant freezer that is always stocked with the cheapest options available. Because my God, feeding an entire school is expensive. And it's not even counting like the students. You also have to take care of the faculty. Yeah, not always the best. It takes a lot to work in a school kitchen. Takes a lot, that's for sure. But yeah, we're gonna be going over a special lesson today because up till now we've worked on, you know, our grammar, our sentence structure, different words and phrases and techniques that we can use to improve our writing. But we have yet to look at the fact that, you know, all this is well and good, but what if we don't have the motivation to write? What if we somehow don't feel like writing at all? Like, what happens then? How are we supposed to utilize these techniques that we've learned? Well, that is where we learn about, writer's block. We are going to be going over, you know, just a brief overview of what all goes into writer's block. We're going to be going over ways that we might be able to combat it. And we'll be looking at some different examples of famous people who've also gone through writer's block, because it's not just, you know, it's not just an up and coming thing. It's like people of all ages, all professions, and all sorts of experience. They all have this issue at some point in time. So, writer's block, as you can see here, writer's block, it's a non-medical condition, which I respectfully disagree with. I think that writer's block is very much a medical condition because I'm sick and tired of it. But anyway, writer's block is a non-medical condition in which an author is unable to produce new work or experiences creative slowdown. It's usually associated with writing, gee, I wonder why, but it can be applied to most, if not all, creative fields. Which makes sense. Just because it's called writer's block does not necessarily mean that other creative fields don't experience something similar. You know, you could just have artist block where they can't think of a new thing to paint or draw or illustrate or something like that. Or you might have, I don't know if sculptor's block is a thing. I mean, it kind of makes sense. They work with blocks all the time, but I don't know. At any rate, the main lesson to be learned here is that writer's block, it affects a lot of people. And actually, I think that's the point of the next slide as well. Yes, it affects pretty much everyone in the creative field. You're not alone in feeling it. And it's easy to understand why, because conjuring ideas takes a lot of energy. And using a lot of energy is very exhausting to the brain. I myself, have very big bouts of writer's block, a lot, significantly. And it's unfortunate. It's very sucky because I feel like the ideas are there. I just don't have the energy or the motivation to get them out. If there's something to push me in that direction, then I'll go for it by any means. But anything else about writer's block? How does it happen? This is based off of personal experience, a little bit of research as well. But usually, at least for me, usually writer's block happens from a lack of inspiration or motivation. And it can really suck. It can really suck when you feel very inspired, but you lack the energy to carry out that inspiration. Or you really, really want to do it, but you just don't have any ideas to sprout from. It's like a very vicious cycle. Like when you have the time, you don't have the means. And when you have the means, you don't have the time. It always goes back and forth. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. For some, there's also a fear of criticism or an anger over it. Like they want to write down their ideas, but they're just very, very afraid that it's not going to be well received by the audience that they're going for. Or they've gotten some bad reviews in the past and they're like, ugh, what is this garbage? Like, why don't people appreciate my art, sort of things. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, life just be like that sometimes. You know, sometimes it's just a struggle to survive. And writing kind of falls to the wayside, unfortunately. You gotta make ends meet, you gotta go to your day job, or maybe you've got other obligations going on. Maybe you get sick and you have to go spend some time in the hospital. Maybe you have to take care of family situations, family matters, things like that. As sucky as it can be, writer's block is just a thing that naturally happens. It's part of the creative process. It's better to sort of like accept that and work around it rather than try to like brute force your way out of it. So here are some ways to overcome writer's block. I know we just got into a little bit of what writer's block is, but I feel like the ways to get out of writer's block, the ways to overcome it, are a lot more significant. A lot of people, like, they kind of get a general idea of what it means to be in writer's block. What's harder and what's more challenging for people to apply themselves to is the way to overcome said writer's block. So the first option we have here, just write. As easy as that might sound, and as much as you might be, easier said than done, writing can actually be very beneficial to your creativity. Just write as much as possible for what time you have. Like if you have a 30-minute break and you just have your phone or like a notepad or something like that, just write down a couple ideas. Even just brainstorming counts as writing. And the more you write, the more you're going to get into the habit of spending that allotted time working on your stuff. Like it doesn't even have to be the most like polished, detailed thing. As you're working on the piece, you're not going to be like writing down all of your sentences and then going, oh, it's complete, I've finished the final draft. No, I'm assuming that you're working on a rough draft of some kind. Maybe you're in like the editing cycle, or you're just getting your ideas down. But either way, you're not going to have a finished product right away. So it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. Even if it's just a sentence, or even if it's just like a word or two, you got to build it up, especially if it's been a while since you've last done any sort of writing. So maybe you just start with a few words a day, and then that slowly grows into a couple more sentences. And then after you start writing more and more, you start to get more ideas and like, oh, maybe the story goes in this direction or something like that. And pretty soon you're writing paragraph after paragraph and just rolling with it. And your writing block has turned into a writing sphere. I guess, because you're rolling with it. Anyway, option 2, touch grass. So it might seem kind of weird why you think, oh, touching grass, like what good would that do for my writer's block? In order to be a good writer, you need to know how to describe things properly and in detail. You have to be very detail oriented so that it can come across in your writing. And firsthand experiences, going outside and experiencing these things you want to write about, they can be a great well from which you can draw inspiration. And also, literally touching grass makes for great descriptors. If you want to like describe the way someone lies down in a field of grass, it can be like maybe the dew clings to your clothes and stuff like that. And when you try to get up, there's all that like dampness on your back, but it can be very soothing and relaxing. Or maybe the grass is very itchy because it's been dry. You're not going to know how to describe that properly in your writing if you haven't experienced it yourself. Also, it's just good for your general health to go outside every once in a while. Get that vitamin D from the sun, get that fresh air. So it's not only good for your writing, it's good for your body as well. And you can't write if you don't have a body. Another way you can overcome writer's block is to read. We already did the writing thing, and now we're going to move on to the reading thing. And we're going to ignore Gaston. I'm going to cover up Gaston a little bit just in case a certain mouse is watching me and would get very angry at me for putting this in my slides. You can read from established authors, and they can be a great source of inspiration. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do with your sci-fi novel, and so you pick up a sci-fi novel that you've been looking at for some time. Maybe it's sitting on your shelf and you've been like, oh, I'll get to it eventually, but then you never do. Well, this would be a great time to open that book up and see if you can find any interesting details. Like the way a writer writes, the way that they describe a certain scene or a person or an event, the way that they personalize a character, the way they give it a personality, things like that. You can draw from that inspiration and maybe learn some new words or creative choices from said author. It's happened to me plenty of times. And not only that, but sometimes an author is just really, really good at their craft, and it makes you appreciate writing a lot more. That's happened to me sometimes too. So you just got to be on the lookout for it. You just got to make sure that you read a good book. I don't know, maybe a bad book can be as equally inspiring. Like, wow, if this person were able to get published, it's like, I'm a shoo-in or something like that. It can either reaffirm your skills or grow your skills, develop them. Option number 4. Option number 4, when it comes to overcoming writer's block, is to form a writing group. Forming a writing group can be very, very productive. Just being around other people who are also working on their own stuff. It can also boost your own productivity. You can find friends or just different locals. Maybe you can find some events online for group writing sessions and what have you. And yeah, just being around productive people helps to boost your own productivity. And not only that, but being around other people gives you a more immediate source to brainstorm with people, bounce ideas off of each other. Right out of college, I didn't really do a lot of writing. I mean, I did a lot of submitting, and I wrote a poem from time to time, but as far as novels that I was working on and stuff, I just kept getting met with rejection after rejection, so I figured I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna stop for a while. But thankfully, I had stayed in the town where I went to college, and I had a couple college friends living there as well. One of them would meet me at the library every, I think it was Wednesday or so. Every Wednesday, we would go to the library in the afternoon, and we would just get our laptops out and just start writing away. And it was a nice time. It was a very, very nice time. It also depends on environment. I guess that's another thing when it comes to the writing groups. Your writing environment is very beneficial to a writer's block. Or depending on where it is, it could be very detrimental to your writer's block. You want to make sure that you're working in a comfortable environment. You don't want a lot of distractions. You want to make sure that you have the capability to focus on what it is you're working on. And lastly, this was supposed to say option 5. This was supposed to be option 5, but I done goofed up. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. It's very, very true. Taking a break can be very good for your writer's block. Like I said before, writing and creativity, they're a lot of work. They're a lot of mental work. So you could just be tired. You could just be exhausted, like your brain doesn't want to focus on this thing anymore. I mean, it could be different if it's dependent on your income. Like you need to write this if you want to have a job. That's different. But if it's more of a side project, maybe you just want to come back to it. Just make sure that you come back to your project feeling refreshed. But also, very important, make sure that you actually come back to your project. You have no idea how many times people have started a project and then quit halfway through, and they'll be like, oh, I'll be back to it eventually. But again, life finds a way to get in the way of things. And writer's block is kind of a manifestation of that. So make sure you don't give in, and make sure you actually keep your wits about you. Make sure that you actually come back to the project that you put on hold. Otherwise, it's just going to end up collecting dust. And I'm not speaking from personal experience. Definitely not. Definitely not. Anyway, after all is said and done, here are some more helpful tips. One thing I actually heard in college, some writers, whether through an app or they just go someplace that doesn't have a Wi-Fi signal or something like that, some writers will remove their internet access to focus on their writing. Like I said before, keeping distractions to a minimum definitely helps out your work environment. As good as it can be, like especially when it comes to your research and stuff like that, as good as it is, it can also be a bit of a distraction. Like, it's so easy to just get lost on social media or news stories or even just play games. You want to remove any potential threats to your productivity, and unfortunately the internet is kind of one of those, especially if you're like in the middle of writing. But when you're in the like preliminary stages of getting all your research done and stuff like that, the internet can be helpful. It definitely can. Just make sure that you're focusing your attention on the things related to your writing. Background noise also helps you get into what my drawing teacher back in high school called left brain mode. I don't know if it's necessarily a misnomer or if there's actually like a lot of research behind it, but they say that the left brain is more your creative side and your right brain is wait a minute, do I have it mixed up? I think the left brain is the objective, like no nonsense business side, but the right brain is the more creative one. I forget. Either way, one of your hemispheres has to do with creativity, and getting in that headspace where you focus on that creativity, especially with like music or things in the background, it can help you out there. Another helpful tip, exercise your writing muscles. Just because you're experiencing writer's block on a specific project doesn't mean you have to keep working on that project. The first option, the first way to overcome writer's block that I had mentioned, just writing, it doesn't necessarily have to pertain to writing on the piece that you're stuck on. It could be that you write on something else, because writing is like a muscle. And just like any other muscle, you want to make sure that you properly work it out before you get to the main exercise or things like that. So in a way, you have to exercise your writing muscles. Do some writing challenges before moving on to your main projects. Maybe you can do a 2-page short story on cheese or something like that. Or write a couple stanzas of a poem before moving on to your epic tale that rivals Dante's Inferno or something like that. Most importantly, when it comes to writing exercises and what have you, or just exercising in general, make sure that you stick to a regimen, a schedule. Make sure that you're writing at the same times. Like any time that you have open and available to you, you spend it writing. And you make that schedule for yourself, you stick to it, so eventually you come to this point where anytime you have free time, you just spend it on your writing. It doesn't even have to be something that you like actually want to work on or want to like throw out into the world. Sometimes your writing projects are just writing exercises. That's all they are. They're just a little pre-workout before the main workout. There are a couple quotes here that we have from some famous writers. I want to quickly go over those. The first one we have is from John Steinbeck. You might know John Steinbeck from Of Mice and Men, or The Grapes of Wrath, or The Pearl. Just some of the prolific things that he's written for American literature. You know, no biggie. His opinion on writer's block is this. It is usual that the moment you write for publication, I mean One, of course. For some reason, he couldn't say you, he had to say one. One stiffens in exactly the same way one does when one is being photographed. The simplest way to overcome this is to write it to someone like me. Write it as a letter aimed at one person. This removes the vague terror of addressing the large and faceless audience, and it also, you will find, will give a sense of freedom and a lack of self-consciousness. I find this to be a pretty interesting outlook on the creative process because, I mean, it is good advice. You know, if you're writing for a general audience, like so let's say that you want to write for teenagers, you know, if you're trying to write a teenage novel or something for middle schoolers, high schoolers, what have you, if you're just writing to a general teenager, you might lose your focus on what it is you're trying to get across in your works. But let's say that you have a specific teenager in mind, maybe one from your own experiences, your own schooling, or maybe a teen that you currently have in your life. Maybe you're older and you want to write something for your daughter or son or just child, or somebody else's child, something like that. And you kind of cater towards their interests a little bit more. You know what they would like, so you apply that to your writing, and if they like it, then chances are that a lot of other teens that are like them are also going to like it. So I do like that sense of like direction for John Steinbeck. It also kind of goes with that fear of criticism that we were talking about before. If you are afraid, oh, well, these people, I don't know if it's going to reach the audience that I want it to. If you have a specific person in mind, like not just a demographic, but an actual example of that demographic, then it can help you have more of a narrow focus and kind of drive that point further home. Next up, we have Toni Morrison, also a very, very famous author. I think it's called Zula is the book that I really like from her. These are her thoughts on writer's block. I disavow that term. There are times when you don't know what you're doing or when you don't have access to the language or the event. So if you're sensitive, you can't do it. When I wrote Beloved, I thought about it for 3 years. I started writing the manuscript after thinking about it and getting to know the people and getting over the fear of entering that arena, and it took me 3 more years to write it. But those other 3 years I was still at work, though I hadn't put a word down. And that also speaks to the other point that we're making. It's a lot of work to get your thoughts all pieced together. It's a lot of mental exercise. So it's very understandable that you wouldn't spend a lot of time like on your computer or at a notepad or something doing the actual writing. But just because you're not doing any actual writing does not mean that you aren't being productive about it. Sometimes brainstorming is just as tedious of a process as the actual writing is. So what here is the biggest lesson? The biggest lesson is that writer's block is daunting, but it's not impossible to overcome. There are plenty of resources that you can utilize. There are plenty of tips and tricks that you can take advantage of. You can use those to overcome your writer's block, and it might not happen right away. Sometimes it's going to take time, and you don't have to be in a rush about it. It might feel like you have to, like, oh man, I need to use my time effectively. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you can take some time away from whatever it is you're working on. Just make sure you come back to it. Next up, your work doesn't have to be perfect the first time. The first draft is not the final draft. I have a bad habit of making it the final draft just because I don't do a lot of edits. Well, more so for like short stories or poetry. But otherwise, I definitely, like my current novel that I'm working on, I'm on like draft 7, and I just sent it out to beta readers not too long ago. So I'm still going through the edits there as well. But yeah, your work doesn't have to be perfect for the first time. So if you're worried about all those things, all those criticisms, you know, don't be. Sometimes you just gotta work through and keep on writing your stuff down. And like, it doesn't even have to be like proper descriptions. Like sometimes if you want to get through a writer's block, all you really need to do is write down a summation of what a specific sequence or scene is going to be. Like, you don't have to go into detail of chapters 7 and 8 and 9. You could just say chapter 7 through 9. They're going to go to the temple, and then they're going to put this thing in there, and then monkeys are going to attack them. Something like that. As long as you come back to those specific sections and later rework them, I would hope you do that. I don't know of a lot of like very famous books that just say chapters 7 through 9. They don't matter, move on. There's a bit more creativity to it than that. Also, support systems help. Support systems are very, very good when it comes to just writing, creativity in general. People who can hype you up and make you feel like, yeah, I'm doing a good job with my writing. Or people who can give you constructive criticisms, like, oh, maybe you gotta work on this with this specific character. I notice you use the word untoward too many times, so maybe slow your roll there. Support systems are very, very good. And, as always, don't get discouraged. Writing takes time, writing takes effort, and you're not the only person writing in the world. There are tons of people putting out their creativity in so many different ways. So you might feel like, oh, these rejection letters mean that people don't like me or something like that. I've fallen into that pit trap myself. However, that's not necessarily the case. Maybe it's just they found somebody who was a better match, or they weren't taking that specific genre at the time of publication. Maybe they just weren't looking for that, but you just got to keep at it. You'll find somebody who appreciates your writing for what it is, and they will want to get more of it from you. So always apply yourself, and you can't apply yourself if you're letting this writer's block get in the way of that. You got to push it to the side. You got to work on your stuff. Here are the sources. As always, gotta appreciate our sources, and we are donezo. Bam.